This science center has a roller coaster. It's a pretty good one, too. Did you ever visit one of those children museums when you were younger? Well, Volcania in France is just that, except they said we want to do more. We want to have rides and attractions. When they opened their doors in 2002, they had a goal with educating the public on volcanoes. They wanted them to learn the sciences behind them and draw in more tourists to this part of France. Volcania is located 25 minutes from the city of Clermont-Ferrand. It's a beautiful area with tons of rolling hills and, yes, even a volcano. We had the opportunity to visit for our first time in the summer 2023. Our main reason for visiting was because of their Intamin straddle coaster with a drop track. It is called Namazu. It opened at the park back in 2021, so still relatively new. And I think just because of its location, it flew under the radar. Us being big roller coaster fans, we'd of course done many similar style rides, such as Dark Coaster at Busch Gardens Williamsburg, Wave Breaker at SeaWorld San Antonio, and earlier that day, Yukon Quad at La Pal. La Pal is a wildlife theme park located about an hour and a half away from Vulcania, and we decided to do both in the same day. Now, that was purely because we are tight on time. Originally, Vulcania wasn't even in our schedule. We were just planning to do La Pal that day, but we said, this place looks pretty cool. We really should try and visit. The downside was that it meant that we didn't have as much time here as we probably would have liked. We ended up spending about 2 hours at Volcania. I would recommend at least 3. Maybe more if you really want to spend time doing everything. It depends on what your goals are. They just have the one roller coaster, and actually we did manage to ride that 3 times. We really got a good feel for it. I'll go in depth into Namazu here in a second. But the other main attractions in Volcania are screen-based. They have a lot of different types of simulators. This includes a trackless dark ride, their own take on Soarin', except instead of sitting, you're standing. And they also have France's largest planetarium, which is supposed to be fantastic. I've heard amazing things. Unfortunately, that was one of the attractions that we did not get to do. But if I ever find myself back in the area, I actually really would love to revisit Volcania and do everything we missed. Because it was quite a pretty park. And the terrain of this place is fascinating. Essentially, it is built up on 5 different levels, which you wouldn't expect because when you walk in, you can tell that it's hilly, but you think you can just keep walking and eventually arrive at some rides, but it's not that simple. When you enter the park, you are on level 0. One of the first things you'll get to is this massive building, and in there, you can go down 2 different floors. There's also this massive ramp that'll take you to the upper level that surrounds this crater in the center of the park. It is nuts. None of what we had seen at this point felt like a theme park. It felt like we were at some sort of museum or like a science center. But then you get past that and it's like, oh look, there's a roller coaster. So Namazu is towards the back, but actually there's a big loop that goes around the back section of Volcania. But it's more of a nature walkthrough. There aren't any other rides back there. All the simulators that you're looking for are up front. So I imagine that's got to be pretty nice when the weather isn't ideal. Volcania is open year-round. It can get pretty cold in France, so that's a big plus. Now, before I go any further, I feel like I need to talk a little bit about my specific experience with getting into Volcania, because it really wasn't as simple as you might think. Unbeknownst to us, they cut off admission into the park as it gets later in the day. I'm not sure at what time they stopped letting people in, but when we arrived, they were still open for another 2 hours, and we couldn't even get into the parking lot. We had to park in the campground, then walk through the woods, got to the entrance, and there was no one there. You would think the park was closed for the day. But nope, look on their website, yep, they're open. We had to wave someone over, and they're like, we're closed. And we're like, no, you're not. We can see that there are people here, and we have tickets to get in. We made the smart choice of buying them online, which they were actually pretty amazed at. They're like, wait, you have tickets? What? I guess if you arrive later in the day, they won't even sell you tickets at the gate. But we show them their tickets and we're like, can we come on in? And they're like, I guess. We had to talk to 3 different people just to get into the park. It was so weird. So if I can make a recommendation, come here first thing in the morning. Don't deal with what we had to go through. It was a lot of added stress. If you're coming to France for theme parks, I'd recommend rope dropping Volcania, spend 2 to 3 hours here, then make the drive over to La Pal to finish out your day. Or if you have a little bit more time, visit Volcania in the morning, go to the observation deck of the nearby volcano, and then you can walk around Clermont-Ferrand to end things out. So just some things to think about. Now, of course, when we arrived, we went straight for Namazu. It took a bit to find there. To be frank, the layout of this whole place was very confusing. It took a while to get our bearings and even figure out where we were going, but we found the ride in the back of the park. You're greeted with a pre-show that simulates different earthquakes going off at various parts of the world. The floor will start to shake. You'll see all these graphs of seismic activity. Lights will flicker, things will fall apart. It's awesome. You'll then dump out into the station and climb aboard this massive four-wheeler. And then you slide forward into this big cave. It's all dark in there, and then everything starts to fall apart, and then you drop. This drop track is super tame. It does like a little fake out drop and then a bigger one right afterwards. If you've done 13 at Alton Towers, it kind of feels like that. There's no airtime on it. It's very controlled. I want to say it's like a 16-foot drop. Again, this is absolutely a family, specifically a kids park, so I'm not surprised that it's a little bit dialed back. Then you roll forward and hit your first launch. There are 2 launches on Namazu. Both of them are tire driven. There's a max speed of 43 miles per hour. You shoot up out of this lower level into this big overbank turn. In total, it's 53 feet tall. That's your highest moment. But after this big bank turn, the rest of the layout is very low to the ground. It almost reminded me of like you're riding on a go-kart. There are quite a few S-turns. They don't really have like a ton of purpose other than to just be there. The layout as a whole kind of meanders. It's a longer experience than I expected. The back half of the ride is actually very hidden, so you don't know how long it's going to go on for. In total, it's 1,916 feet of track. It's a terrain coaster. Most of the time, you're only a couple feet off the ground. It was hugely popular with all the school groups we saw there. As enthusiasts, we noticed that it definitely wasn't the most forceful attraction. The few moments that we thought were going to be more impactful weren't so much. So I think that in combination with the noticeable shake that the ride has at the front of the train definitely detracted from our experience, but that doesn't change the fact that this is a very unique ride that is actually a fantastic fit for this park, and they did a great job theming it up. You know, a lot of parks that have just one roller coaster usually go with something that's like a plug and play Wacky Worm or SBF Visa, something that's inherently very basic. I don't know of any other straddle coaster that has a drop track, and I'm not counting Hagrid's in that because technically you don't straddle those seats. So that makes this the only one of its kind. So I'm definitely glad that we got to experience it, even though it's not my favorite of the straddle coasters I've done. I mean, even Yukon Quad down the road is a lot better, but this is definitely one of the best themed straddle coasters, that's for sure. It's a story-driven experience, so in giving the ride a final score, I'm going to go with a solid 6.5 out of 10. As far as tamer family experiences go, this one's pretty cool. I would say just keep your expectations level when you hear Intamin multi-launch straddle coaster with a drop track. In reality, the actual ride experience isn't as crazy as you would think. So let's talk about some of the other rides. Well, there's this like Triotech style screen simulator that reminded us a lot of Flight of Passage, but on a budget. It was called Dragon Ride 2. Your seats may or may not work. I would say if you're tight on time, skip this one. There's a simulator called Abyss Explorer, which like takes you underwater to see these volcanoes. That's definitely pretty interesting. Sacred Volcanoes is your trackless dark ride. It's based around like civilizations that worship volcanoes. That's definitely the other big ride here in this park. And again, same theory as what I said with Namazu. Usually when a park has a dark ride, it's something dinky, not very high tech, and this is literally a trackless dark ride. That's awesome. I mentioned this one briefly at the beginning, but First Flight is a screen-based experience that's like kind of their take on a flying theater, except instead you're on this pedestal and then it rotates you to face the action. Very weird. Never seen something like that before. And in walking around, I also saw a set of ellipticals that you could just like work out on, but then there were also like VR headsets attached to them. I was like, what on earth is this? Just some very bizarre things to do here. But overall, Volcania has a relaxing vibe. Lots of wide open space. You can do as much or as little as you want. It's not very expensive to get in. But I do worry about repeatability. Like, I don't mind going back because we missed some attractions that I wouldn't mind doing. But if you accomplished everything in your first visit, I could absolutely see this being a one and done location. So maybe that's a downside. But if you're in the area, I would still recommend it. Just don't go largely out of your way for it. I think if you tie it in with some other nearby attractions, then it'd be worth it. So let me know down in the comments below if you've been to Volcania in France, if you agree with the points that I brought up, and of course stay tuned for more here at Coaster Studios, and I'll see you next time.